Anyone who has spent hours studying for an exam, writing code, or analyzing dense reports knows the sensation of severe mental fatigue. Your focus shatters, your processing slows down, and your brain feels as though it is physically shutting off. But biological reality contradicts that feeling. If we measure raw cognitive capacity at the exact moment you feel most exhausted, your brain's ability to process information remains largely intact. We often default to a gas tank model to explain exhaustion. We assume that prolonged mental effort drains a literal reserve of processing fuel, and when the tank hits empty, we stop working. The data shows this model is incorrect. If the hardware hasn't failed and the fuel hasn't actually run out, we have to ask why the brain generates such an overwhelming, almost painful urge to stop working. Neuroeconomic research suggests a different framework. Cognitive fatigue functions as an active, computationally driven devaluation of effort. This perspective shifts the focus from what the brain can do to what it is willing to do. A study published in the Journal of Neuroscience successfully isolated this process, mapping the exact decision-making circuit in real time as participants became exhausted. To understand mental exhaustion, we must abandon the idea of an engine running out of gas. Instead, we have to view the brain as an economist, actively recalculating the price of its own labor. To map this economic recalculation, the researchers first needed a baseline. They asked participants in a rested state to evaluate how much cognitive effort they were willing to exert for a specific amount of money. This graphic shows the trial's exact choice mechanics. Participants accepted a low-effort default task, a one-back memory test for $1, or a higher-effort task for greater reward. Per panel E's timeline, researchers then induced exhaustion, alternating rigorous 3-back exertion blocks with new choice trials. An N-back task is highly demanding. It requires the participant to hold a constantly updating stream of information in their working memory and continuously compare new inputs against it. It forces a state of sustained, heavy cognitive load. As the participants progressed through hours of these fatiguing blocks, the researchers tracked their accuracy. The critical control variable outcome was clear. Participant performance on the fatiguing tasks did not decline. In fact, their success rates marginally increased over time. Their cognitive processing capacity remained intact, despite their rising self-reported feelings of mental fatigue. Since their physical ability to do the work remained steady, their subsequent drop in willingness to accept high-effort tasks couldn't be a hardware failure. It had to be a specific neural circuit actively signaling the brain to quit. We can see exactly how this circuit changes behavior by looking at the choices participants made once the fatiguing blocks took effect. Brains evaluate work using a mathematical concept called effort discounting. The subjective value of any reward is calculated by taking the raw reward and subtracting the required effort. Because cognitive effort is highly demanding, the value of a reward drops sharply as effort increases. The steepness of that drop is controlled by a variable economists call K. When a person enters a fatigued state, their K variable shifts, punishing high-effort options much more severely. We can observe this mathematical shift directly in the recorded behavioral data. This heat map displays choices made in the rested baseline state. Notice the broad distribution. Participants regularly accepted high-effort tasks for adequate reward. But in the late fatigue heat map, dark squares retreat heavily toward the bottom left. Participants fled to low-effort options, rejecting high payouts. The fatigue phase successfully altered the subjective value of the work within the brain's economic center. The brain decided the work was no longer worth the price, independent of its ability to execute the task. To find where this devaluation occurs, researchers track the underlying neural architecture using fMRI, capturing the brain's activity the millisecond a choice was made. These fMRI scans identify the baseline effort valuation network. When a participant weighs a cost against a benefit, regions including the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, the nucleus accumbens, and the ventromedial prefrontal cortex light up. The fMRI tracks the precise difference between the subjective value of the option the participant ultimately chooses and the option they reject. But as the participants transition into a fatigued state, the scan in panel C isolates a divergence. A specific region called the Right Anterior Insula, or RNs, becomes hypersensitive to the chosen subjective value. Biologically, the RNs is responsible for encoding proprioceptive signals. It reads your internal bodily states, monitoring physical tension, heart rate, and internal stress. It takes those internal readings and applies them directly to the valuation network, driving down the subjective value of prospective effort when it detects strain. While the RNs acts as the brain's economic calculator, it is blind. It relies entirely on a specific external neural signal to inform it that the brain is currently fatigued and that prices need to be adjusted. If the RNs is just the calculator, what region is acting as the sensor? What part of the brain is actually monitoring the cognitive burn during intense working memory tasks? This scan isolates the Dorsolateral Prefrontal Cortex, or DLPFC, which manages high-level cognitive demand. Notice the intense signal activation during the exertion phase. Tracking this over time, sustained DLPFC activity directly correlates with the accumulation of sequential fatigue blocks. To prove these regions work together, the researchers ran a psychophysiological interaction analysis. This method determines if activity in one brain region directly modulates another. They used this analysis to test if the DLPFC sensor was communicating with the RINS calculator during effort-based choices. The results confirmed a robust modulation of connectivity between these two regions. During a fatigued state, they physically couple. The operational mechanism works like this. The DLPFC tracks the cognitive toll of the work. It passes this telemetry directly to the RINS, which then immediately depresses the mathematical value of any future effort. The data even showed that individuals who fail to tune this DLPFC activity appropriately find prospective effort exponentially more costly than those who do. This specific DLPFC to right ends channel is the physical architecture of cognitive fatigue. It is the literal, biological mechanism that talks you out of doing hard work. This brings us back to our initial problem. If macro performance is perfectly fine, and we haven't lost our ability to process information, why does the DLPFC trigger this economic shutdown in the first place? The answer lies in the microbiological reality of extended neural firing. Sustained cognitive exertion causes metabolic waste and glutamate to accumulate in task-related regions. To manage this, the brain engages in a phenomenon called local sleep. Individual clusters of overtaxed neurons briefly power down to protect themselves and recover, emitting the exact same slow theta waves seen in early-stage sleep. The rest of the network stays awake and routes around them to keep you functioning. While your overall system still functions, these local sleep cycles cause micro-errors and processing inefficiencies to silently compound in the background. The DLPFC detects this impending metabolic distress and local neural degradation long before your global performance actually fails. The fatigue signal sent to the RNs is a preemptive strike. It is not a reaction to failure. It is a mechanism to prevent it. The brain manufactures the intense feeling of fatigue to force a behavioral change, making you stop working, before localized metabolic stress can cascade into a system-wide failure. The full neural sequence functions as a defense mechanism. Metabolic distress triggers the DLPFC, which couples with the RNs, altering the effort discounting math so severely that you choose to stop working. Because this is a metabolic and mathematical issue, passive rest, like closing your eyes for a moment or scrolling on your phone, fails to clear the valuation penalty. The neural circuits linked to focus never actually shut down, so the telemetry to the RINs continues. Interleaving different cognitive tasks or taking active physical movement breaks successfully interrupts the local sleep cycles. It shifts the blood flow and resets the valuation networks, temporarily adjusting the economic math in your favor. True sleep is the only biological mechanism capable of flushing accumulated metabolic waste from the cortex and restoring the K variable back to baseline. A wandering mind during a long study session reflects the system operating as designed to conserve energy. The biological drive to rest is simply overriding the desire to continue the task. Having an economic governor on our cognitive processing ensures that we don't push our most vital, energy-intensive organ past the point of structural safety. Cognitive fatigue represents a precise neuroeconomic intervention. It is a safeguard designed to preserve the long-term health of the brain.